The warm winds of late spring blew over Pinehurst, a small town nestled in the foothills of Colorado, where the mountains kissed the sky and the land stretched as far as the eye could see. For 12-year-old Natalie Baker, it felt like the whole world had just narrowed down to this single moment. Her fingers tightened around the worn leather reins as she stood beside Blaze, the wild stallion she had been working with for months. His fiery eyes scanned the crowd gathered outside the arena, but his attention quickly returned to her, the soft rhythm of her breath guiding him like a silent melody. In the last few weeks, Blaze had transformed from an unpredictable, dangerous creature into something entirely different, something almost impossible, a partner. But today, nothing about the crowd felt normal. Today, everything was about to change. Natalie glanced up at her grandmother, Elaine, who stood watching with a proud yet worried expression. The fairgrounds were bustling with activity, vendors shouting over the chatter of the crowd, children running between stalls, and the distant hum of a live band playing somewhere in the background. Cameras on tripods were set up around the arena, their lenses pointed at her and Blaze. The bright lights and television crews added a layer of pressure that Natalie wasn't sure she could handle. The weight of her mother's legacy rested on her shoulders, and it felt heavier than ever. "Are you ready?" Elaine asked, her voice soft but filled with the strength Natalie had always admired in her. Natalie nodded, though her stomach twisted into knots. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She had been working with Blaze since the moment he'd been brought to the ranch, using the same gentle methods her mother had pioneered. Emma Baker, Natalie's late mother, had been a renowned horse trainer in the region, and her unique approach had earned her both respect and scorn. But with Emma gone, Natalie had become the sole heir to her mother's methods. As she stood next to Blaze, the memories of her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Patience, Natalie. Patience and understanding. That's how we change the world, one horse at a time." But this wasn't just any demonstration. The entire town was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. This was about proving her mother's methods to the very people who had doubted them for years. And there was one person in particular who didn't believe. Preston Arlington. The man had money, power, and influence, and his presence was enough to make even the strongest of men quiver. He had shown up at the ranch a few weeks earlier with a challenge, a bet, really. He claimed that no one could tame a wild horse in 5 minutes, and he intended to prove that the traditional, more aggressive methods of breaking horses were superior. Natalie's mother, Emma, had always said that horses weren't machines to be controlled. She'd believed that with enough trust, horses would cooperate. But in Arlington's eyes, that was nonsense. "Let's see if this little girl can do what professionals can't," Arlington had sneered, his cold eyes studying Natalie as if she were nothing more than a spectacle. He had his own team of professional trainers, each one more rugged and hardened than the next. But it wasn't just their skill that worried Natalie. It was their belief that brute force was the only way to tame a horse. The media coverage for today's event only added to the weight on her shoulders. How could she possibly prove herself against someone with such overwhelming influence? "Everything's going to be okay," Elaine reassured her, a hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Your mother believed in you, and so do I." Natalie glanced at her grandmother, seeing the familiar warmth in her eyes, but also a flicker of concern. It was the same look she had worn years ago, when Emma had first started training Blaze. Back then, Blaze was nothing more than a wild stallion that no one thought could be tamed. But her mother had never given up on him, just as she had never given up on Natalie. The sound of the crowd grew louder as the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, drawing Natalie's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The demonstration will begin shortly." She took a deep breath, pushing aside the doubts that threatened to overwhelm her. Blaze nickered softly beside her, his ears flicking as though he, too, felt the tension. He was ready, he trusted her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Natalie realized that she was ready too. Suddenly, a sleek black SUV rolled up, drawing a few murmurs from the crowd. The door opened, and Preston Arlington stepped out, his immaculate Western suit glinting under the sun. His silver hair gleamed like a crown of power as he adjusted his Stetson and surveyed the crowd with a look of superiority. Behind him, James Arlington, his son, followed, flanked by two burly trainers. The trainers didn't say much, but their weathered faces and heavy equipment spoke volumes. They were professionals, and they were there to prove something. "Well, well," Preston Arlington's voice boomed as he walked over to the small group of onlookers. He looked straight at Natalie, his smile never wavering. "The moment of truth is almost here, Miss Baker. Are you prepared?" Before Natalie could respond, Franklin, her father's old friend, stepped forward, positioning himself between her and Preston with a protective stance. "Schedule changes, television crews. You're pulling out all the stops, aren't you, Preston?" Franklin's tone was calm, but there was an edge of suspicion in his voice. "The Fair Board requested the schedule adjustment," Preston replied smoothly. "And the television coverage? It benefits everyone. Win or lose, your little miracle girl will be famous by sundown." His words dripped with sarcasm. "This isn't a competition," Natalie said quietly, moving to stand beside Franklin. She wasn't going to be baited. "Everything's a competition, child," Preston shot back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Your mother never understood that either." With that, he tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Best of luck to you. You're certainly going to need it." As Preston and his team walked off, one of the trainers lingered, eyeing Blaze with professional interest. "Fine animal," he muttered, almost reluctantly, ashamed to waste him on circus tricks. James Arlington smirked. "Don't worry, after today, Dad will get him back one way or another." Franklin took a threatening step forward, but Sheriff Davis placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That's enough, James. Move along." Once Arlington's team had gone, the tension in the air was palpable. Sheriff Davis turned to Natalie and Elaine, his expression grim. "I don't like the sound of that," he said. "I'm assigning a deputy to stay with Blaze at all times until after your demonstration." "Thank you, Sheriff," Elaine said, her voice steady but grateful. Franklin checked his watch, glancing toward the gates. "An hour until showtime. Natalie, you should get changed and have something to eat. We'll keep Blaze ready." Natalie nodded reluctantly, walking away from Blaze's side. As she passed through the crowds, she noticed familiar faces scattered throughout. Miss Carter and her class, including Lucy, who waved enthusiastically from the front. Edith Harris and her group were already whispering behind their hands. Mayor Harper was talking to constituents near the entrance, looking uncomfortable under the weight of the situation. Everyone's here, Natalie thought, a wave of unease flooding over her. The pressure was real, but was she ready for it? Elaine squeezed her hand reassuringly. "They're here because they believe in you, both of you." Inside the participants' changing area, Natalie slipped into the outfit they had prepared. A simple, practical ensemble that felt more like something her mother would wear than a flashy performance costume. A pair of well-worn jeans, a chambray shirt, and her mother's old training vest, which Elaine had carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. As Natalie braided her hair, her thoughts drifted back to her parents. What would they think of all this? Would they be proud of her? Would they be worried? She whispered to the empty room, "Mom, I hope I'm doing this right. When Natalie returned to the paddock, she found an unexpected visitor talking with Dr. Wilson and Franklin. Samuel Clearwater, the elderly Native American man who had first spotted Blaze in the wild years ago. "Mr. Clearwater, you came?" Natalie said, surprised but touched. The old man smiled, his deep lines around his eyes crinkling. "I wouldn't miss it. That horse and I have history," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of knowledge. "I tracked him for 3 seasons before giving up, decided some spirits aren't meant to be captured." His gaze turned to Blaze, who was watching him with a steady, almost curious expression. "He wasn't meant to be captured," Natalie said softly, her voice almost reverent. "But maybe he was meant to be understood." Clearwater studied her thoughtfully. "Your mother used to say something similar. She believed there was wisdom in listening to animals rather than forcing them to listen to us." "You knew my mother too?" Natalie asked, though the answer seemed less surprising now. Everyone in Pinehurst seemed to have known her mother. "It seemed I taught her about the wild herds," Clearwater explained, "about their social structures, their communication methods. She was a good student, asked the right questions." He reached out tentatively toward Blaze, who, to everyone's surprise, stretched his neck to sniff the old man's hand. "She would be very proud of what you're doing today," Clearwater said quietly. Just then, a fair official appeared, clipboard in hand. "Miss Baker, you're on in 15 minutes. We need to start moving your horse to the staging area." The time had come. The moment had arrived. Natalie felt a quiet anticipation settle over her as she followed the fair official, her heart pounding in her chest. Each step seemed to take her further into a storm she wasn't sure she could weather. The staging area loomed ahead, surrounded by volunteers and trainers getting their final preparations ready for the spectacle. Cameras were rolling, catching every movement, every glance. It was no longer just about Blaze and the demonstration. It was about everything. "Just stick to what you know, Doctor." Wilson's calm voice broke through Natalie's swirling thoughts. "You've practiced this. You've got this." Her grandmother, Elaine, gave her a gentle push forward, a silent encouragement that spoke volumes. The older woman's face was a mixture of pride and worry. She trusted Natalie with every ounce of her being, but she also knew the pressure this child was under. As they made their way toward the arena, Natalie saw the crowds growing, a sea of unfamiliar faces, some of them filled with genuine curiosity, others with skepticism. She could almost hear their unspoken judgments in the air. Would she succeed? Or would she fail like so many before her, attempting to tame a wild spirit that had no place in human hands? Blaze walked by her side, his head high, ears flicking back and forth. He felt the tension too, but he also trusted her. He had learned to trust her in ways that were hard for people to understand. The bond they shared was stronger than any expectation, any doubt. They moved as one, the rhythm of their steps mirroring the calm pulse of their hearts. "Looks like the circus is in town," came a familiar voice behind them. Natalie tensed, recognizing the voice before she even turned around. Preston Arlington, resplendent in his black cowboy hat and pristine Western suit, appeared at the edge of the arena, flanked by his 2 professional trainers. The camera lights from the television crews caught his every move as he strode into the spotlight like a man who believed he owned the world. "You nervous, Miss Baker?" he asked with an insincere smile, his eyes gleaming with something colder than mere rivalry. "You should be. This isn't just about horses, you know. It's about proving a point. And I plan to make sure everyone sees who the real professional is here." Natalie didn't answer. She couldn't. The words were caught in her throat, but they didn't need to be said. Her silence, her focus on Blaze, was all the answer she needed to give. Elaine stepped forward, her eyes sharp. "Preston," she said with quiet authority, "you can go on and put on your show, but today isn't about competing. It's about showing people that there's a better way." Preston's eyes flicked to her grandmother, and for a moment, something flickered in his gaze. Something cold, something calculating. "You're fooling yourself if you think this is about anything but winning. We'll see who's really the better trainer when this is all over." Franklin, standing nearby, stepped forward as well. "It's about what's right, Preston. You might want to remember that." "Right," Preston repeated with a dry laugh. "We'll see." The announcer's voice rang out over the loudspeakers, cutting through the tension like a knife. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the highlight of the day. The demonstration that will prove once and for all what true training looks like. Miss Natalie Baker and her wild stallion, Blaze." The crowd erupted in applause, but Natalie barely heard it. She was already focused, already in tune with Blaze. The applause, the lights, the cameras, they were all just background noise to her now. She was with Blaze, and that's all that mattered. As they stepped into the arena, the crowd fell silent, their eyes trained on the pair. The bleachers were packed, the cameras zooming in for every small detail. Blaze stood still for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, his nostrils flaring as he breathed in the air. The stands were a blur, the people little more than shadows, but he was with Natalie, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Natalie took a deep breath, centering herself, just as she had practiced. With a slow, deliberate movement, she unclipped the lead rope from Blaze's halter, allowing him to move freely in the arena. There was no turning back now. It was just the two of them, facing the world. The crowd gasped, their anticipation palpable. Blaze stood still for a moment, uncertain. It was a bold move, one that no one had expected. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Natalie took out the harmonica her mother had once played. The first soft notes floated through the air, the familiar lullaby carrying across the arena. Blaze's ears flicked forward, and for a brief second the world stood still. His tense posture began to relax, his body language softening as the music settled around them like a blanket of peace. The crowd, initially unsure of what was happening, fell into an awed silence. They had come expecting tricks, drama, something spectacular. What they got instead was something far more profound. Blaze took a step forward, his eyes locked on Natalie, as if searching for her approval. She smiled softly, the music still playing, the connection between them growing stronger with every note. There were no sharp commands, no jerky movements. It was just a quiet, shared understanding. Natalie moved gracefully, guiding Blaze through a series of small movements. Nothing too flashy, nothing designed to impress. Just a simple, gentle dance, their steps moving in sync with each other. Blaze followed her, responding to the softest signals, a glance, a slight shift in her posture. The crowd leaned forward, mesmerized. They had expected to see a display of dominance, a battle of wills. Instead, they were watching something entirely different, a partnership between a young girl and a wild animal. It was more powerful than any display of force. It was the quiet strength of trust. As Natalie stopped and turned, her gaze met Preston Arlington's in the stands. His confident smirk had faded into a tight-lipped frown, his eyes narrowing as he watched the demonstration unfold. This wasn't what he had expected. Natalie's heart raced, but she kept her focus on Blaze. It was all about him now, and nothing else mattered. After a few moments, the soft music stopped, and Natalie took a step back, signaling Blaze to do the same. He stopped obediently, his eyes soft, his posture relaxed. The crowd erupted into applause. They weren't just applauding the performance, they were applauding the connection, the quiet strength that had taken place in the arena. But just as the applause began to die down, the announcer's voice rang out again. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for a demonstration of traditional Mustang braking techniques, please welcome Mr. Preston Arlington and his professional trainers." The crowd shifted, murmuring in anticipation, and then the opposite gate of the arena opened, revealing two cowboys on horseback, flanking a terrified black stallion. The horse struggled against its restraints, its wild eyes wide with panic. The crowd gasped, some cheering, some unsure. The contrast was stark. Preston Arlington strode confidently into the arena, microphone in hand, his voice booming through the loudspeakers. "Thank you for that charming display, Miss Baker," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. "But now, let me show you how real professionals do it." The black stallion continued to fight, terror written in every part of its body. The two trainers worked with ruthless precision, forcing the horse into submission with sharp commands, pulling and tugging at the reins. The horse's fear was palpable, its body trembling as it resisted. Natalie's stomach twisted in knots. This was exactly what Franklin had warned her about. A staged comparison designed to undermine her. It was clear as day. But something was wrong. Blaze, who had been standing quietly at her side, tensed, his ears flattening as he watched the chaos unfolding in front of him. The stallion's terror seemed to reach out to Blaze, and before anyone could react, Blaze pulled away from Natalie, trotting into the arena with purpose. "No," Natalie called, alarmed. She wasn't prepared for this. Blaze had always been so controlled, so calm. This wasn't part of the plan. But Blaze wasn't listening to her anymore. He was moving toward the other stallion, his body language changing. The connection between the two horses was immediate. Blaze circled the struggling black stallion, nickered softly, his body communicating something only another horse could understand. And just like that, the chaos began to subside. The black stallion's struggle slowed. Its head turned toward Blaze, ears flicking in cautious curiosity. The trainers, caught off guard, tried to intervene, but Blaze wasn't having it. He wasn't going to let this horse suffer. Natalie walked calmly into the arena, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let them go," she called to the trainers. "Please, just for a moment." The trainers hesitated, looking to Preston for direction. But he stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. He hadn't expected this, and neither had anyone else. Natalie pulled the harmonica from her pocket and played her mother's lullaby once more. The soft, soothing melody filled the air. The horses, once filled with fear, now stood side by side, their bodies relaxed, their ears flicking in time with the music. The crowd watched in astonishment as the two horses, one wild, one once untamable, stood together, calm and connected. Preston Arlington had no words. No one did. The crowd began to cheer, but this time it wasn't just applause for a performance. It was a recognition of something deeper, something real. And in that moment, Natalie knew her mother had been right. Horses didn't need to be broken. They needed to be understood. The deafening applause that followed the unexpected turn of events seemed to reverberate through Natalie's chest. She stood still in the center of the arena, heart racing, while Blaze continued to stand beside her, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. The air was thick with emotion, amazement, disbelief, and something deeper. The connection they had just demonstrated was undeniable. But even as the cheers surrounded her, Natalie couldn't shake the nagging feeling at the back of her mind. This moment wasn't over. She could feel Preston Arlington's eyes burning into her from across the arena, his presence like a storm on the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was only a matter of time before he would try to regain control of the situation. As the crowd began to filter out, murmuring excitedly, Natalie felt the weight of her role settling heavily on her shoulders. What had started as a small demonstration had turned into something far larger, something much more significant. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her mother's legacy, about proving that there was a better way to train horses, a way rooted in understanding, not force. She had made her point, but this battle wasn't won yet. From the corner of her eye, she saw Preston speaking with his trainers. His face was set in a grim line, and his usual confident smirk was gone. He wasn't taking this lightly. In fact, Natalie could see that he was already planning his next move. "Let's head back to the barn," Dr. Wilson's voice broke through Natalie's thoughts. The older woman's gaze was calm, but there was a sense of urgency in her eyes. She knew what was coming. "Stay focused, Natalie. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Elaine, who had been watching the whole scene unfold with quiet pride, stepped up beside them. "You did well," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But now we have to stay sharp. Preston won't back down." Natalie nodded, her mind racing. They were right. She had no illusions about the fact that Preston wouldn't let this moment go without a fight. He was too proud, too powerful to accept defeat. And what was worse, he had the resources and influence to make this whole thing much more complicated than it needed to be. As they walked back toward the stables, Natalie felt the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her. The eyes of the town were on her now, and the television coverage had already gone viral. She was no longer just the quiet, shy girl with a wild horse. She was a symbol of something greater, a symbol of change, of a new way forward. And with that came not only admiration but scrutiny. Blaze walked beside her, his hooves steady on the dirt, his head held high. Natalie reached out to give him a reassuring pat. She could feel the bond between them, solid and unbreakable, despite the chaos surrounding them. He trusted her. That was all that mattered. As they reached the barn, she paused, turning to look back at the arena. The place where it had all happened. The place where her mother's methods had been put to the test and had, for the first time, proven themselves beyond a doubt. But still, in the back of her mind, she could hear Preston's voice, sharp and biting, accusing her of being nothing more than a miracle girl, a child who had somehow gotten lucky. "We'll be ready, Doctor," Wilson said, as if reading her mind. "Preston won't give up so easily, but you've shown him that there's more than one way to approach this." Natalie nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to back down, not now, not after everything her mother had fought for. She was going to carry that fight forward, no matter the cost. The next day, news of the demonstration spread like wildfire. Clips from the fair were posted all over social media, and the headlines practically screamed in disbelief. "Miracle Girl tames wild stallion without force," and "Blaze, the untamable stallion now the star of Pinehurst." Everyone in town, even those who had doubted her, was suddenly a believer. But not Preston Arlington. He wasn't one to be swayed by public opinion, and the embarrassment of being upstaged by a 12-year-old girl was something he would never forgive. The days that followed were filled with tense conversations and whispered warnings. It wasn't long before Preston made his next move. "Have you heard the news?" Franklin asked, his voice low and tense as he entered the Baker household a few days later. Preston's announced a new challenge. Elaine's face darkened. "What kind of challenge?" she asked, already knowing she wasn't going to like the answer. "He's taking out one of his own wild mustangs for a public demonstration." He's going to break the horse in front of the same crowd. He's calling it the true way of Mustang training. Franklin's voice was grim, his jaw set. He's betting that he can do it in half the time it took you, and he's using Blaze as the comparison. Natalie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. Preston wasn't going to let her win. He was going to show everyone that his way was better, faster, and more effective. Elaine crossed her arms over her chest. He's not going to win. We have something he doesn't have. We have understanding, patience, and we have each other. She looked at Natalie, her expression fierce. We won't let him use Blaze as a pawn in his game. Dr. Wilson stepped forward. We need to show them that this isn't just about proving a point. This is about what's best for the horses. Blaze has already shown the world that his spirit isn't broken, that he can work with a person in a way Preston's methods can't even begin to touch. Natalie clenched her fists at her sides. She wasn't going to back down, not when it came to Blaze, not when it came to her mother's legacy. The day of the challenge arrived, and the tension in Pinehurst was palpable. The fairgrounds were packed with spectators, eager to see the showdown between Preston's traditional methods and Natalie's softer, more understanding approach. The cameras were rolling, the announcers were hyping up the event, and the whole town seemed to be watching. As Natalie led Blaze into the arena, she felt a familiar rush of nerves. But this time, they weren't the same nerves she had felt before. This time, she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Blaze, for her mother's methods, for all the wild horses that had been misunderstood and mistreated. She was fighting for something much larger than any one person. Blaze walked beside her, his calm presence reassuring her as always. His hooves clopped softly on the dirt floor, his head held high with a quiet dignity. He wasn't afraid, he wasn't nervous. He was ready. The crowd was still, watching with bated breath as Preston made his grand entrance. He was flanked by his trainers, his face a mask of determination. He didn't even look at Natalie as he strode past her, his eyes locked on Blaze. He had no idea what he was about to face. The tension was thick in the air as the final challenge between Natalie and Preston unfolded before the crowd. The fairground arena was buzzing with anticipation, the energy almost crackling with electric expectation. The grandstands were packed, with everyone from local ranchers to curious visitors drawn in by the dramatic showdown that was about to take place. The media was there too, their cameras capturing every moment, every movement, every change in expression. This wasn't just a contest for horses. It was a contest for the soul of Pinehurst. Natalie stood tall at the edge of the arena, her back straight, her hands loosely gripping the lead rope that connected her to Blaze. The stallion stood quietly beside her, his body at ease, but his instincts sharp, sensing the challenge ahead. They had practiced for this moment, but nothing could prepare them for the weight of the crowd's eyes or the pressure that came with representing her mother's methods to a skeptical world. Blaze shifted his weight slightly, his hooves scraping the dirt, as if preparing himself for what was about to unfold. Natalie took a deep breath, steadying herself, feeling the familiar warmth of the connection between them. It wasn't just about the crowd or the spectacle. It was about proving something far more important: the validity of her mother's teachings, the power of patience and understanding, and the quiet strength that came with trust, not force. Preston had already taken his position on the other side of the arena, his expression hard and unforgiving. His Mustang stood in a small pen, its body tense, eyes wide with fear. It was a powerful animal, wild and untamed, a perfect example of Preston's approach: break the spirit to bend the will. Natalie's heart ached for the horse. She could see the terror in its eyes, the desperation in its movements. But she also knew that she had Blaze, and with him, she had something that Preston didn't understand: trust. She wasn't here to prove who could break a horse faster. She was here to show that horses could be understood, that their spirits didn't need to be broken to work together. The announcer's voice cut through the air, booming across the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event will showcase the two very different methods of horse training. On one side, we have Preston Arlington, a veteran of traditional methods, ready to demonstrate how to break a Mustang in record time. On the other, we have Natalie Baker, a young girl with a controversial approach, believed to be using methods pioneered by her late mother, Emma Baker. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Let the challenge begin. The crowd erupted into applause, but Natalie barely heard it. She was focused solely on Blaze. His head was high, ears forward, and though he could feel the tension in the air, he wasn't afraid. He was with her, and for the first time, Natalie felt the full weight of her responsibility. She wasn't just representing her mother's work, she was carrying it forward, into a future that had yet to be written. As the challenge began, Preston's trainers led the Mustang into the center of the arena. It fought against them, thrashing against the ropes that bound it. The horse's eyes were wild, its movements frantic as it struggled to break free. The crowd's reaction was immediate: gasps, murmurs, and a few sympathetic shouts of "Easy there!" But Preston remained calm, his expression unchanged. This was what he had prepared for. Natalie turned to Blaze, who stood calmly at her side. She could feel the stir of energy within him, the subtle tension that told her he was ready. She nodded to him, a silent understanding passing between them. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, she walked to the center of the arena, guiding Blaze forward. As they moved into position, the spotlight shifted to them. The crowd went silent. Preston smirked from across the arena, watching with a disbelieving shake of his head. "Let's see how long this charade lasts," he muttered under his breath. But Natalie didn't hear him. She was focused on Blaze, on the rhythm of his movements, and on the connection they shared. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small harmonica her mother had once used during training. The first notes floated through the arena, soft and steady, filling the space with a calm, gentle melody. Blaze's ears twitched at the sound, and for a moment, the wild energy in the arena seemed to fade. The Mustang across the arena still struggled, thrashing against the ropes, its fear evident in every panicked movement. But Blaze stood still, his eyes locked on Natalie, his body swaying gently to the rhythm of the harmonica. The crowd watched in rapt silence as Natalie continued to play, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The Mustang's movements slowly started to slow, its head turning toward the sound of the music. Blaze, ever steady, continued to move in rhythm, his steps synchronized with Natalie's subtle gestures. There was no force, no demand for compliance, just a quiet invitation to connect, to listen, and to understand. As the minutes passed, the Mustang's body began to relax. Its frantic movements subsided, and its posture softened. It wasn't that it was tamed or broken. It was simply listening, responding, and choosing to engage in a new kind of communication. A horse that had once been wild, frightened, and untouchable was now standing in the arena, its head lowered in quiet curiosity. For the first time that day, Preston Arlington's confident facade began to crack. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he watched the transformation unfold before him. His trainers, who had been prepared to take control of the Mustang, stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The Mustang had stopped fighting. No one had expected that. Natalie finished playing the harmonica and lowered it gently. The Mustang, though still cautious, approached her. It sniffed the air around her, then slowly stepped forward, its movements tentative but not fearful. Natalie reached out a hand, palm open, and the Mustang hesitated for a moment before it gently nuzzled her fingers. A hush fell over the arena. The crowd held its breath, watching in disbelief as the Mustang continued to approach Natalie, its fear fading with each passing second. "Enough!" Preston's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, breaking the silence. "Get that horse back." But there was no mistaking the hesitation in his tone. Even he knew that the Mustang wasn't fighting anymore. It was responding to something far more powerful than brute strength, something that Preston's methods could never touch. Natalie remained calm, her hand still extended to the Mustang. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice carrying across the arena. "No one's going to hurt you. You're safe now." The Mustang, no longer struggling, allowed Natalie to lead it slowly around the arena. Blaze followed beside her, walking calmly in step. The connection between them was clear, evident to everyone watching. This wasn't a show of dominance. It was a demonstration of partnership, of mutual respect. The crowd, once skeptical, now watched in stunned silence. The sight of two wild horses, one once thought untamable, now walking peacefully with a young girl, was nothing short of miraculous. The harsh reality of what Preston had tried to accomplish was laid bare. His methods, rooted in fear and force, were no match for the quiet power of understanding and trust. Preston stood frozen, his face flushed with frustration. He had lost. Not because he had been outdone in skill, but because the truth had been laid bare before him. The way he trained horses, by breaking their spirits, was not the answer. And as the Mustang stood beside Natalie, its once frantic energy now replaced by calm, the crowd couldn't help but erupt into applause. As the crowd cheered, Franklin stepped forward from the sidelines, a satisfied smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I think it's safe to say the crowd has made their choice, don't you think?" Natalie looked up at him, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the moment. She nodded, her gaze returning to Blaze, who stood by her side, his calm presence grounding her. "This isn't about winning," she said quietly. "It's about showing them what's possible." Elaine, standing beside Dr. Wilson, watched her granddaughter with a proud smile. "You've done it, sweetheart. You've shown them that understanding is stronger than force, and that's something Preston will never be able to deny." But despite the victory, Natalie knew that the battle wasn't truly over. Preston Arlington was a man of pride, and he wouldn't let this defeat slide easily. But for now, in this moment, she had won. And that was enough. The aftermath of the fair's eventful day felt surreal to Natalie. The echo of applause still lingered in her ears, but beneath it there was a hum of uncertainty, a quiet question lingering in the air. What now? She had done it. She had proven her mother's methods, and in doing so she had shown the entire community of Pinehurst a different way of thinking about horses. But the weight of the victory was already starting to shift into something more complicated. Her thoughts were interrupted as the Baker Ranch gates creaked open, signaling the arrival of visitors. Franklin's truck pulled up first, followed by the sheriff's jeep, and then a small convoy of local ranchers and supporters who had rallied around her. It was a scene of quiet triumph, a community coming together, but there was still a lingering tension in the air. "I think we need to talk," Elaine said softly, stepping out of the barn and onto the porch, her eyes fixed on the group that was now gathering near the main entrance. Natalie gave a small nod, taking a deep breath. "About what?" "About what happens next," Elaine said with a knowing smile. "This this isn't just about one demonstration. There's going to be more attention, more people looking at you, at the ranch, and at your mother's methods. You're going to need support, more than what we've had so far." Natalie looked at Blaze, who was grazing lazily in the paddock, his coat gleaming under the late afternoon sun. "I know, it's just, everything's changing so fast. I wasn't prepared for it to be like this." Elaine stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her granddaughter's shoulders. "You're not alone in this, Natalie. You've got us, and you've got this town, even if they don't all know it yet." Before Natalie could respond, Sheriff Davis, Dr. Wilson, and a few familiar faces from the community joined them on the porch. It was clear they all had a part to play in the next chapter, even if none of them were entirely sure what that chapter would look like. "I don't think we're going to be able to turn back now, Natalie," Dr. Wilson said with a small, thoughtful smile. "Not after today." Natalie met her gaze, feeling both a thrill of excitement and a lump in her throat. "I didn't do it for the attention. I just wanted to show them what my mom believed in, to prove it wasn't a fluke." "And you did that," Sheriff Davis said, his tone calm but firm. "But now we need to think about the future. What are we going to do with all this attention? We need to make sure we use it for something good." Natalie nodded, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of the responsibility that had just fallen into her lap. She wasn't just representing her mother anymore. She was carrying the torch for an entire way of life, for a community that had once been skeptical but was now looking to her for answers. "That's the question, isn't it?" she murmured. "What do we do next?" "We start building," Franklin said, his voice steady with the conviction he had always carried. "We start building on what you've proven, Natalie. You've shown them it's possible. Now it's time to show them it's sustainable. It's time to start a real training program, a facility where people can come and learn from you, from your mother's methods." Natalie blinked, caught off guard. "A training facility? Why not?" Franklin said, stepping forward. "Your mother's methods, your methods, could change the way people think about horses. If we build the right space, we could attract ranchers, trainers, and even universities, and not just in Pinehurst but beyond." "I agree, Doctor," Wilson said, nodding. "The interest is already there. We can't let it slip away, but we need to make sure we have the right resources. This isn't going to be easy, but I think we can do it." Elaine stepped back, surveying the group. "You're all right. This is what Emma would have wanted. She never gave up on this vision, and neither can we. But Natalie, this isn't going to be an easy road. We'll need more than just people who believe in you. We'll need real backing, funds, facilities. A plan." The weight of what Elaine was saying hung heavy in the air. Natalie had only just started to comprehend what it meant to turn her mother's dream into a reality, and now it was clear that the challenge was just beginning. She hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. She hadn't expected her life to shift so drastically after one demonstration. But that was what was happening. The weeks that followed the fair felt like a blur. News of Natalie's success spread quickly, and soon calls began pouring in from all over. Reporters, horse owners, even universities, all asking for interviews or offering partnerships. The attention, both positive and negative, was overwhelming. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Blaze, the stallion, who had once been the symbol of her mother's greatest challenge, now stood at the heart of Natalie's growing success. He was no longer just a wild stallion. He was a testament to the power of patience and understanding. He was her partner, her closest ally, and in many ways the embodiment of everything her mother had believed in. As the weeks turned into months, Natalie found herself working harder than she ever had before. The ranch became a hub of activity, with people coming from all directions to see the miracle girl and her stallion. trainers, ranchers, even curious tourists all wanted to witness the bond between Natalie and Blaze, to see for themselves if the stories were true. But it wasn't just about Blaze anymore. It became clear that the future of the ranch, and of the horses, wasn't just about one girl's ability to train a wild stallion. It was about creating a lasting legacy, one that would protect the wild herds and teach others to work with animals, not against them. And for that, Natalie would need more than just the support of her family and friends. She would need the support of the community. And as much as that idea terrified her, it also filled her with a quiet sense of purpose. One late evening, as Natalie stood in the barn, brushing Blaze, she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. She glanced up and saw a sleek black SUV pulling into the driveway. The driver was someone she didn't recognize. A man in a well-tailored suit stepped out, his expression serious and businesslike. "Miss Baker?" he asked, walking toward her. "I'm William Hayes. I've been sent on behalf of the Western Heritage Foundation." Natalie felt her stomach tighten. She had heard of the foundation, an organization dedicated to preserving traditional Western ways, including horsemanship. They had been following her story closely, and the idea that they might be here to make an offer, or worse, to take control of her mother's legacy, made her wary. "Yes, I'm Natalie," she said, her voice cautious. "I've been authorized to offer you a partnership," William said, his voice smooth and professional. "We believe in what you're doing here, and we'd like to offer our support. The foundation has resources, expertise, and connections that could help you expand this program, build something truly lasting." He handed her a thick folder. "We'd like to discuss the details, but we believe there's a future here. A future where your mother's methods can be taught to the next generation of trainers." Natalie hesitated, glancing down at the folder, the weight of his words sinking in. The idea of a partnership was appealing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The foundation was offering resources, but what would they expect in return? What would that mean for her control over the ranch, the program, and the future of Blaze and the wild horses she had come to love? "Thank you for the offer," Natalie said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm ready to make that decision yet." William nodded, seemingly unfazed by her hesitation. "Of course, but we'll be waiting when you're ready." As he turned and walked back to the SUV, Natalie felt the familiar weight of uncertainty settle in her chest. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about deciding what kind of future she wanted and what she was willing to fight for. And as she watched the SUV drive away, she knew one thing for certain. No matter what, she couldn't let anyone else decide what her mother's legacy would be. That was her responsibility now, and she would fight for it.